So some of you may already know that I have been on an all-in journey for the past 3.5 months to recover my menstrual cycles and my weight and my health overall. So this entails basically eating to satiety at each and every meal, or just anytime I feel the need to eat something, I honor my hunger drive. This was a necessary process in order to restabilize my hormones and my health. And you guys have reached out and asked a ton of really awesome questions. So I thought it'd be fun to do just a Q&A today to perhaps provide you some insight if you're struggling with hypothalamic amenorrhea, relative energy deficiency in sport, or just general low energy availability. So many of us are on these crazy crash diets and intermittent fasting for extended hours throughout the day and fasting for days on end and not understanding or really taking the time to look into what it is that we are doing to our bodies when we are in a calorie deficit. Because the more research I've done on starvation studies and overfeeding studies, it really points to the fact that we are not meant to be in a calorie deficit long-term or frequently throughout our lives. Even though that has been our history, the data is very clear that that is what we did to survive, but it's not what we did to thrive. This process of going through this all-in journey and refeeding and getting back to a place of stability with my hormones and my hunger drive and my mood and my energy, it's really caused me to reflect on some of my previous beliefs about what it means to be healthy and what it means to lose weight in a healthy way. I have received so much wonderful feedback that I wanted to take the time and answer some of these questions for you guys. So I'm just gonna dive in. The first one was very straightforward. How long did I have hypothalamic amenorrhea? I have no idea. I have not had my period in 6 years prior to Thanksgiving Day, a couple weeks ago. So I have no idea when this all began, because 6 years ago I was pregnant and then I breastfed for 3 years. So it's really confusing trying to pinpoint the exact time frame that my periods were ceased because of low energy availability or not having enough energy to provide my body with those kinds of higher end biological functions. What I mean by that is when your body is starving, it doesn't waste its energy trying to make babies. So I may or may not have had this when I was pregnant and breastfeeding. The science is still very new, and I don't think they quite understand something as specific as the limitations between pregnancy, breastfeeding, and having your period. Because as we all know, pregnancy shuts off your period. Breastfeeding shuts off your period for the most part. But even when I was only breastfeeding my daughter once or twice a day and having very minimal milk supply at the end of that 3-year duration, I should have been able to have regained my period at that time. But when it did not come back, I knew that that was a red flag to go in and see my doctor. And at that point in time, I had so many other health concerns that were created by the hypothalamic amenorrhea that I wasn't aware of at the time, that I was really relieved to not only put a name to what was going on with me, what was going wrong in my body, but also that they were all interconnected. So basically, I had complete control over regaining my health and putting all the pieces back together and trying to regain some normalcy with my hormones and with my body. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is kind of sensitive for certain folks, but I wanted to include this because I think I'm coming from a very scientific and objective perspective, and I just want to give people the facts of my experience. So I'm going to be talking about the weight gain specifically, how I'm dealing with it, concerns over whether I've gained too much and now I'm going on the opposite end of the spectrum and now I'm unhealthy because I'm overweight, or the fast weight gain as opposed to slow incremental weight gain, not giving into my hunger drive 100%, but doing it in a more controlled manner where I'm only slowly increasing my calories on a daily basis. None of that made sense to me. Everything that I've read, everything that I researched, it was very clear what I had to do. I had to start listening to and honoring my body. If I was hungry in the middle of the night, I had to get up and eat something. If I was hungry immediately following a meal, which happened very frequently, I had to get up and eat something. It was that simple. My hypothalamus was consistently suppressed by these signals of not getting calories when my body very clearly needed the calories. So I was not going to try to intellectually work my way through this problem. I wasn't going to try to use my discipline or what I had come to believe was healthy or right for my body. I was simply going to eat a surplus of calories until my body felt that it was safe. Because regular increments of glucose metabolism is what my body wanted, it's what my body asked for, and it's exactly what I gave it. Our society is so terrified of giving into our hunger drive. But when you have been on crash diets or intermittent fasted to an extreme, or just played around with your dietary intake to the point where you were actively working against your body when it was telling you it was still hungry and it still wanted food, those hunger signals are there for a reason. I think people get to the point where I was, where you're so hungry that when you finally do eat, you feel like you lose control and you're concerned about the binge word because there's so much, stigma around binge eating. But really all you're doing is honoring that hunger drive. And I think a better word for it is feasting. Tabitha Farrar talks a lot about this. When your body is in that state of caloric deficit, so many of your organ tissues and your cells throughout your body have come to a point of downregulation and compromise that they need that additional amount of energy to recover and recuperate and regenerate back to a point of homeostasis. So no, at any point in time, do I regret giving into my hunger 100%? Yes, it's very difficult dealing with the weight gain. I estimate I gained 35 to 40 pounds. I'm not 100%. I know that's not super scientific, but I have not stepped on my scale in a long time, and I don't intend to. I know I'm in a point of influx right now. I'm in the middle of my journey. So this is only halfway. Recovering your period is only the beginning. Then you have to really focus on reframing your mindset and getting to a point where you are constantly giving into your hunger and feeding yourself properly and not overdoing it in the gym and not setting all these rules around how much you should be eating at what point in the day or how much you should not be eating. I will say that this is the most I've ever weighed in my life besides when I was pregnant, so I don't feel like that really counts. And I've also never had so much weight around my midsection. And the more I learned about the Minnesota starvation experiment, the more sense it made. The majority of my weight gain went straight to my belly because that is the place that weight gain is most distributed when you're coming from a state of starvation. And it's also distributed with a higher percentage, predominantly a percentage of fat. And the reason I felt it was so important to gain this weight quickly as opposed to slow and controlled and incrementally is because I could feel, aside from what the research said, which also backed this particular hypothesis, but what I felt in my body every time that I was like, nope, okay, I feel like I've gained too much weight. I'm not going to continue giving into my hunger. It's wrong. There's no way I need to gain more. So there was a point in my journey where I had decided I was going to try to actively cut my calories again and try to level out and plateau at the amount of weight that I had gained because I was uncomfortable going any higher at that point. Instantaneously, my body recreated that extreme hunger that is so prevalent in this condition. And when I was trying to cut those calories, I would get all shaky and uncomfortable and just lightheaded and brain foggy. Like it was very clear that my body was not done gaining, and I had to honor that experience. I had to honor that signal. I don't know if I'm going to gain any more weight, and my weight seems to have plateaued for quite a while now. But if my body did feel it needed to gain more weight, I would continue to honor my hunger drive. It is currently my understanding that my weight will eventually start to decline back to a place where it feels it's at its equilibrium. It will not be anywhere near as slim as where I was prior to starting this all-in journey, when I was at like the peak of my hypothalamic amenorrhea. But I think it's going to be somewhere in between where I am now and where I was then. Somewhere where I used to be in the past before I started the wild intermittent fasting schedule, the high exercise routine, exercising fasted every day. So that's just my hypothesis. So make sure you stick around so you can watch upcoming videos. And hopefully, usually at a point between 8 months and 12 months, people get back to a state of equilibrium in this process. But it could take up to 3 years. For some people, that's what has been recorded. So I am going to be optimistic and just deal with the weight gain and the discomfort. And hopefully I can resume some new norm and health for my body. While we're on the subject, I also got a lot of questions about my appetite and whether or not I still experience extreme hunger even though I've got my period back. For those of you who are unaware of that lingo, extreme hunger is exactly what happens when you have been in a calorie deficit for too long. Whether it's short-term or long-term, your hunger drive will go into overdrive and basically make you eat way more calories than you're comfortable with, physically and mentally. Most of us refer to that as binge eating, but really it's just your body trying to restabilize and find its equilibrium. So I have not experienced extreme hunger since that earlier point in my journey when I explained that I was no longer comfortable gaining any more weight and I tried to control the amount of weight that I was gaining by cutting my calories again and exercising. And that did not go so well. So my extreme hunger kicked back in at that point. But I'm very sure that it would have remained out of the picture if I had just continued to listen to my hunger drive in the first place. But the extreme hunger was very prevalent for the initial 2.5 months that I was dealing with this condition. Extreme hunger basically means that you cannot feel full. No matter how much food, no matter how many calories you put in your body, you will get up from the table and immediately go back to the fridge and find more food because you are just a bottomless pit. There's also such a thing as mental hunger during this process, which means that my body didn't feel hungry, but my mind could not stop thinking about food. It was very disconnected and confusing. The hypothesis behind this occurrence is basically when somebody gets to a point that they have been ignoring their hunger signals for so long. This can be either not giving in when your hunger kicks in or discontinuing a meal prematurely. So you feel like you could eat more, but you're not going to because for whatever intellectual reason you think you should have had enough calories to control your weight. So the idea is if you have been ignoring those signals long enough, your body will stop sending them to some degree. If your body starts to recognize that there is not enough calories coming in to maintain all of its normal processing, then it is going to try to get your attention in other ways. It is very metabolically taxing to continue to send those chemical messengers to your brain and your stomach and creating those gastric contractions and releasing those certain enzymes that make you feel like, okay, physically, I need to go eat something. It will stop all that and instead just send those very minimally metabolically taxing signals to your brain, letting you know you should be eating right now. I'm gonna make you obsess about thoughts about food until you go into the kitchen and find something to eat. So initially, the mental hunger and the extreme hunger was absolutely insatiable. I was ravenous all the time. I was obsessing about food all the time, and I was physically hungry all the time. After that initial brief week or so that I was trying to get rid of my intermittent fasting schedule and slowly start to refeed and let my digestion kind of catch up. But eventually you had no control over the situation and you just have to open the floodgates and let it happen. After that 2.5 months, my appetite has been very regular. I am able to eat a snack before my light workout in the morning and then a large breakfast, maybe a snack before lunch, or sometimes I eat a whole meal during a snack time, particularly after breakfast and then maybe again in the evening. I'm generally eating 3 balanced meals throughout the day and snacks whenever I feel the need. I never, ever, ever do not give in to my hunger drive if my body's telling me I need more food. Because if I do that too many times, I will again suppress my hypothalamus and have to work all over at getting my period back. So I am just going to try to stay compliant as much as possible. People get so nervous that they're going to be in this extreme hunger, this mental hunger stage for so long that they'll just keep gaining and gaining and gaining and it'll never shut off. But your body is so much smarter than that. For any of you who are listening to this who are suffering from like chronic dieting or extreme intermittent fasting or extreme exercise schedules, just know that if you start this process, this all-in process, and you give in to your body 100% and just let it rest and recover and be nourished, you will get to a point where your body stops gaining the weight. And like I said, I am very adamant that I feel that I will likely go back to a normal weight, and not normal based on what the BMI chart says, but normal based on what my body has been in the past, what my family members look like, what my genetics seem to be. That is where I think my body will end up. But again, stay tuned for that. the crazy hunger goes away and the appetite will ultimately start to reduce, getting you back to a state of equilibrium with your weight. So you will no longer feel overweight and you will no longer feel underweight. You will just be content with wherever your body ends up at your set point. And I'll do a video in the future on set point theory as well. Overall, my appetite feels very normal, and whatever that means. Since my eating has been so disordered for so many years, it's very difficult to know what normal is at this point. But I feel like 3 snacks and 3 meals a day is pretty standard, and that's kind of where my body has ended up. That's where my hunger drive has ended up. So the next question is about my digestion and how that is going, because I had mentioned in the past that I was suffering from extreme chronic constipation and bloating and distension and pain. I was seeing a physical therapist that couldn't help me until I got rid of that problem. So that's what kind of started the process for me trying to find a diagnosis. This is super fascinating now that I'm out of that part of the journey, but what happens and why I was experiencing such chronic constipation and bloating and gas and discomfort is because, regardless of how much fiber I was eating, because anybody who's familiar with this channel, you know I eat ridiculous amounts of fiber. Everything on my plate has fiber. So for me to be constipated, I was like, what the heck am I possibly doing wrong? I exercise like crazy. I drink, I stay hydrated. Like, why could I possibly be constipated? It turns out when we are so undernourished, we are lacking the energy to move our food through our digestive tract. So not only do we not have the energy, like the metabolic energy, but we don't have the musculature anymore because you have been allowing your body to get to such a state that it doesn't have the strength to contract the muscles and move the food through your system. The gas and the bloating and the distension comes from the feces sitting in your colon fermenting and creating all of those chemical reactions that create the gas and the discomfort that you feel, the pressure that you feel. So even though I was taking a probiotic throughout the entire past 3.5 months, I still suffered dramatically of what it's like to go from a state of starvation to a state of refeeding. I don't want to get into any gory details, but let's just say if I wasn't eating, I was probably in the bathroom on the toilet. And if I was sleeping, I was probably awoken in the middle of the night from the pain of my digestive tract trying so hard to move that food through my system and push it down through the colon. When your body is so used to not eating barely at all throughout the day and then only a little bit when you are eating, it's very difficult to go from that to a state of extreme refeeding and just eating everything in sight. Today, however, my digestion has calmed down a bit, a lot, I would have to say, compared to what I was dealing with. I was in tears almost every day. I'm not going to act like this was an easy process or that I was at all graceful moving through it. I cried a lot. I cried about the weight. I cried about what I looked like. I cried about what I felt like. I cried about the pain I was in from the digestion, not being able to sleep, the insomnia. Like, this was a very unsexy process. And I'm very glad that I am now out of the weeds. And I just want to say that the body image stuff, I never lost weight I never maintained that weird health regimen that I thought was improving my health. I never wanted it to be super slim. Like, I did not like what I looked like. I did not like looking like a skeleton. My boyfriend didn't like what I looked like. I've always been very athletic and I've always been very muscular. So it was really uncomfortable for me to lose so much muscle mass and so much of my physique. The one reason I wanted to remain that slim, and the one reason why I miss being that slim, is because of the way I felt in my body, like proprioceptive wise. So I could get into the deepest yoga poses and I could move freely. Like, my body wasn't getting stuck. My range of motion wasn't deterred by body parts because there was no excess flesh on my body when I moved. It just felt very comfortable to be in my body and to be moving. But now, like, my belly's always in the way. I literally smack my child in the forehead every time I turn around. Like, you cannot get used to all this extra body in such a short period of time. So it really took me, it's still taking me time to get used to the new me. And I have no idea what I'm going to weigh 6 months from now. So I'm trying not to get too used to anything or too attached to a size or a type of, clothing I have in my closet or something. I went from a size 0, sometimes a double 0, to a size 8 in the past 3 months. So that was a pretty big shift in my proprioception and my ability to understand where my body parts are at any given time. My balance is all off when I'm doing my yoga poses now. Standing on one leg is a lot different with 40 extra pounds than it was when I was 100 and whatever pounds. Yeah, it's a lot to get used to. So this next question is interesting. It says, do I think I would have gotten quicker results or less bloating or quicker satiety with animal proteins? At no point in time did I miss animal foods or think that those would be healthier for me for this process. I do feel that my digestion would have been easier and I may have got my period back a tiny bit sooner had I eaten a lot of processed foods. But I don't think there's anything special about animal foods that would have led me to regain my period back sooner, regardless of the fact that they're so high in calories. I mean, maybe that would have been a bonus, but if you eat certain beans and grains and slightly processed foods like dried fruit and nuts, you're getting just as much calories as you would have gotten with the animal foods. And honestly, the way that animal foods slowly slither through your digestive tract and it takes so long to move through it because of the lack of fiber, I don't think that would have been very helpful. As far as the less bloating, maybe, but when you eat dead flesh, you're literally eating all of the endotoxins that are on that flesh, all of the bacteria that survived through the curative or the processing of the meat. So I'm sure that would have created more fermentation. I don't know. I can only speculate at this point because there's no way I'm ever putting another piece of meat in my mouth. Quicker satiety. All I can do is speculate, but I am really happy with my decision to stay whole food plant-based during this process. So this next question is high fat good for female hormones? Now, it is true that there is a big component of our hormones that come from cholesterol and fat. And it is true that our fat in our body is an organ that sends a lot of chemical messaging to the rest of our body, letting it know what our status is at any point in time regarding the amount of fat in our body and what that means for other biological processes, whether they should take place or not. But do I think that eating more fat is what my body needed in order to recover? I don't think so, except for the fact that they're super high in calories, and that's really what my body needed was calories. It's funny because every doctor I saw on this topic was constantly concerned about my protein, of course. What are you eating for protein? Are you getting enough? Blah, blah, blah. Yes, I'm eating enough protein, I assure you. For anybody who's unfamiliar, if you're eating enough calories, you are eating enough protein. So basically, I was not eating enough calories when I was suffering from HA. So I was likely suffering from a protein deficiency and a carbohydrate deficiency and a fat deficiency. So I wouldn't get too extreme about that protein stuff. So it was also asked how much fat I eat now. I have actually really changed my perspective when it comes to fat and whether or not I should refrain from it at all costs. I think fat does have its place in the diet. I just don't think it's as prevalent as a lot of people may feel. And again, everybody's very individualized, so don't feel like what I'm doing is at all what you should be doing. But I make sure to get that tablespoon of flax in my salad every day. Sometimes a tablespoon and a half, sometimes 2. Sometimes I'll throw some sunflower seeds on there. Sometimes I'll grab a handful of Brazil nuts or walnuts or almonds. But I don't go out of my way to make sure I get fat in my diet besides the flax, because that is particularly helpful for stabilizing our hormones. And I'm suffering from a hormonal condition, so that is why I feel I will continue doing that. It's very hard to stay satiated or to reach a point where you feel completely satisfied. I will say on a whole food plant-based diet, at least personally, if I don't add a little bit of fat to at least one of my meals each day. This next question is a big one because for anybody who's familiar with me, I used to be a huge advocate of intermittent fasting. So it really took me for a loop when I had to swallow my pride and admit that maybe I was wrong. And maybe that is not in our best interest. This question is, will I go back to intermittent fasting and do I still recommend it to my clients? I have been helping people lose weight for 5-6 years now, and I have not always used intermittent fasting in my toolbox, but it's always been just that, a tool. It's not something that is necessitated by my approach. I was definitely advocating it for a while there, but I always provide the options, and my clients are the ones who determine what is best for their bodies, their lifestyle, and their preference. Personally, I am not going back to intermittent fasting. I don't feel anything good has come out of it. I thought I was gaining benefits like improved sleep and reduction in my autoimmune symptoms. The second I stopped intermittent fasting and started refeeding, I no longer get those weird symptoms in my hands, and I was getting a lot of numbness and tingling. I also don't have any more of those neuropathy type symptoms. My sleep is actually better than when I was intermittent fasting. So I honestly feel that if anything detrimental can come out of a healthful tool or strategy, it's probably not worth it. Like caffeine, for instance, or coffee. People feel that, well, coffee might reduce Alzheimer's and it has a lot of antioxidants and, it has like a few of these beneficial properties, but yet it increases anxiety and your stress response, and it creates difficulties for sleeping. It just, like, if there are a bunch of these negatives and there's a bunch of these positives, I just don't feel it's worth it at all. I feel there's so many other things we can do for our health that we know are healthful, that have stood through the test of time. Intermittent fasting is such a new fad that I really don't feel like that is something that we can say a whole lot about right now. Even the studies that we have on it, I didn't realize that so much of the research I was reading was done solely on men. Women have very sensitive hormonal responses to not getting enough calories on a regular basis. So no, I don't think that intermittent fasting is very helpful for women, even women who are trying to lose weight. I know it has shown a lot of good responses for people who have obesity and hypertension and diabetes. If you feel that that is in your best interest to do temporarily until you reach a state where you can actually just eat normally and listen to your hunger drive, then I think that's perfectly fine. If there's like a endpoint, like a finality that's predetermined, that might be helpful. Otherwise, the only intermittent fasting I recommend, or that I do personally, is that 12-hour fasting. So I try to, and I don't even have to try personally, it's just comfortable that way. Like my body shuts off its hunger drive around 6 o'clock at night, and then it turns back on at 6 o'clock in the morning. Very simple to follow. And I do feel there's something to be said about giving your body that 12-hour period to, kind of rest and digest and do all the autophagy processing and such. But beyond that, I think there's a lot we don't yet know. I don't think it's good to be running on fumes all the time. There's a reason why our brain doesn't preferentially burn ketone bodies all the time, and that's because it prefers glucose. So if it doesn't have glucose and it's stuck with ketone bodies, you're not really getting the best that your body can give, and you're constantly providing it this inferior fuel that's going to cause more metabolic toxins and junk we don't need in our brain and in our body. So I know that was a mouthful, but that's how I feel about intermittent fasting now that I've been through it. This is a great question. Do I still advocate for a plant-based diet? Yes, 110%. I still advocate for a plant-based diet. I continued to eat that while I was going through the refeeding process, and I continue to eat that today, and I don't foresee that ever changing in the future. There is far too heavy of a preponderance of evidence in that direction for optimal health and longevity. So I don't think I'll ever change my opinion on that. I also feel that I have been able to overcome a lot of other symptoms that I was suffering from that seem to be a lot better now, that may not have been resolved had I eaten something that was less than optimal for my body and potentially creating more inflammation and more problems. So while we're discussing symptoms, this question's about how have my symptoms improved. My sleep is definitely better. I've only had a handful of nights where I've been out on the couch reading in the middle of the night because I can't get back to sleep. And the bladder problems have improved dramatically. I am no longer waking up 6 times a night to use the restroom. I am waking up 1 to 3 times tops, but very rarely. Usually it's 1 to 2 times a night. And I'm so grateful that it's gotten back to that point. I also no longer have the urgency problems. I used to barely make it from my garage where I'd get out of the car and open the door and unlock my daughter, from her chair. I would be squeezing my knees together so hard and trying to calmly get her to swiftly move out of her car seat so we could get into the house and use the bathroom. That has not happened in a very, very long time. I no longer have to worry about where a bathroom is everywhere I go because my lining in my bladder has likely regenerated to a point where it can fully function on a normal level. Hair loss. This is so fascinating. I can't tell you how many plant-based YouTuber videos I've seen where they're like, I lost my hair, it must be the plant-based diet. But really, it's the weight loss. And I presume more times than not, it's significant weight loss. And that is when your body no longer has the energy to continue to grow a normal head of hair. So what happened to me was when I was breastfeeding really heavy, like I was probably pumping way too often when I was at work and my baby was at daycare, my leg hair stopped growing. That should have been my first sign that something was wrong. And then I had no idea my hair had changed so much, but I don't know if you can tell, but I have all these cute little baby hairs coming up. It looks like all these flyaways. So, yeah, apparently I lost a lot of hair when I was intermittent fasting and exercising fasted and eating really low fat calorie meals. And now that I'm getting the proper energy, my body is able to restore my hair. My leg hair is also starting to grow back slowly. And I didn't miss that very much, but I think it's always a healthy sign that, those things are going back in order. My energy is so different. There is nothing more exhausting than exercising yourself to death and not eating enough food to make up for all of that expenditure. My mood has definitely changed. I'm going to be perfectly honest, this has been a very huge step back for me. Like, I have not felt this depressed and this disappointed in myself and uncomfortable in my situation and anxious and just really down on myself these past few months. So I started seeing my psychotherapist again. And she's been helping me because I saw that a lot of studies on hypothalamic amenorrhea actually had women improve and get their periods back just receiving cognitive behavioral therapy alone. So I was like, great, I know an awesome CBT therapist. And that has been helping. It's definitely helping me to reframe my thoughts and not have such a negative filter on everything I do. I already talked about the digestion. That's definitely better. Still could be a little better, but it's come a long way from where it was. My joints, I still have some problems in my joints. I think that's something that's going to take a little bit longer. And then my temperature, my body temperature is much, much better. I'm actually sweating. I have not sweat in years. Like, no matter how much I would work out, how many hours, I was always that weirdo in the gym wearing several layers of clothing and a hoodie. Who does that? But that's also, I feel, is another good indicator that my body's trying to restabilize and lose some of this excess weight that I put on. Because I have such a high thermic effect of food, every time I eat, afterwards I am just a mess, a sweaty mess. And I'm constantly turning down the heat, and my boyfriend's constantly turning back up the heat. All right, guys, I hope this video was informative. I have received so much wonderful feedback from my audience about people who have gone through this process, who are going through this process, or who are just interested in this condition. So I would love it if you would give this video a thumbs up and provide me with any and all comments or questions that you might have about this journey, because I'm trying to figure out exactly which angle I want to take these videos moving forward. I am definitely going to be discussing the Minnesota starvation experiment in an upcoming video, weight set point, the detrimental effects of being in a calorie deficit and why that's not in our best interest, how to lose weight without being in a calorie deficit. Those are the types of videos I would like to do in the future. So let me know if those at all sound interesting or if you have any ideas of what you would like to see in the future, and I will see you guys in the next one.